My name is Stephanie Bird. I am the COO of Unbound Now, and I serve on the Five Stones Steering Committee. I'm filling in for Felicia today. Please don't worry, Felicia will be back next month. And now I'd like to welcome Natalie Perrone, Poema's Education and Outreach Director, to present our Spotlight Agency of the Month.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to see all of you this morning. My name is Natalie Perrone. I serve as the Director of Education and Outreach for Poema Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that fights sex trafficking. We're rooted in our 3 E's, so education, empowerment, and engagement. So through our education program, we educate anybody and everybody that wants to learn about human trafficking. And so that ranges from healthcare providers to churches to hotels, to different businesses all over the state of Texas. Through our engagement ministry, we really try to get the community involved in trying to find missing kids before a trafficker or a perpetrator does. So how we do that is we hand out missing kids posters that are provided by NCMEC into local businesses throughout the areas that our outreach campuses exist. And so we have 16 campuses currently spread throughout the state of Texas, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. And then our last E is empowerment. And so that is through our Safe House for female adult survivors of sex trafficking. There we're able to help them really just get on their feet, help with their psychological, emotional, and all around healing, and just connect them to different things that will help on their healing journey. We actually just celebrated 10 years this past Saturday. So yes, very exciting. And then lastly, the thing I wanted to share with you is we just very recently launched an Intel ministry. And so through this very new ministry, we are able to, through facial recognition created by UNT students, we are able to connect in NCMEC pictures, so a missing kids photo, if they have been posted in any sex ads throughout 16 different states in the United States. And so what we have found is hundreds of thousands of sex ads are being posted just in the city of Dallas alone. And so through this, like I said, we're able to connect that through 16 different states, and we're hopefully launching it to all 50 states of America. So we're able to help out police and private investigators and all the people that are working on these cases, being able to say like, hey, this girl that went missing from Longview, Texas, posted a sex ad in New York City. And so we're able to help them identify them and locate them and bring them to safety. I will be at the table at the front if you guys want to stop by and just say hi afterwards. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Next, we have law enforcement updates. First, we will have Sergeant Johnson with the Fort Worth Police Department, and then he will be followed by Detective Jarvis from the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office.
Good morning. I'm usually not the one doing this, so my guys are all in training this week, so I get the privilege of being up here standing in front of everybody. So for the month of June, we've had 8 new cases. And then we've had several cases that are starting to go to trial and in the coming months. And so one of the biggest ones, a trafficker that we had been looking at since 2018, never had a cooperating victim to pursue. And in January, we got a new victim who started cooperating, and that case actually extends clear across the country. And that case will be going for federal prosecution in the coming months. So and then yesterday, Burleson PD had a runaway who they have suspicions of being trafficked and reached out for our assistance. So that's going to be a good case as well. Sorry, so brief, but we know we want to have time for the panelists to have their say. So thank you.
The Tarrant County Sheriff's Office received this month. They received a tip of possible juvenile trafficking runaway victim. She apparently ran away from home to be with a 26-year-old male that flew in from Germany to Texas. With the help of Uber through their law enforcement portal, we were able to locate both the juvenile and the male at an Airbnb in Arlington. After all the interviews were conducted, there was no indicators of trafficking, but we were able to arrest the male for online solicitation of a minor and sexual assault of a child. He is still in custody at this time. We are currently working 4 new tips involving trafficking. These tips have come from patrol and from our jail. Both of our patrol and jail have done an outstanding job recognizing the indicators of human trafficking during those investigations. In the middle of the month, we hosted a 3-day operation. The first 2 days were victim outreach, and the last day was a demand suppression. Day 1 of the victim outreach, we had 12 victims contacted. 11 of them sought services. A female driver that brought one of the victims to the hotel also asked to receive services, and she was able to meet with victim service providers. We also had one male that was arrested for possession of a controlled substance. He was inside the car when the investigators made contact with him. Day 2, we had 12 victims contacted, all the victims received services at that time. Day 3, the demand suppression, we had 9 arrests for solicitation of prostitution. With one of the males, he was out on bond for sexual assault of a child. He is still in custody as well. And, we also would like to thank Fort Worth PD, Arlington PD, Mansfield PD, Texas DPS, Denton County, Sheriff's Office, Bedford PD, Northwestern Hills PD, A21, and Unbound for their hard work and the assistance in that program, in that operation. So I'll keep you updated for next month. Thank you.
Right, and now we're ready for our panelists to come forward. If all of you could please come on up and have a seat at the table while I introduce each of you. Originally from Nepal, Mridu Adhikari has worked and volunteered abroad in agencies like Johns Hopkins Program for International Education in Gynecology and Obstetrics, Nepal, and Child Workers in Nepal, where her main role was developing situational study and providing life skill training to youth and women. Mridu is passionate about working with diverse population groups, including immigrant youth and children. Coming from an immigrant family, Mridu speaks 3 languages fluently and is learning Spanish. Mridu's education, an MSW from the University of Texas at Arlington, has prepared her for a long career in helping individuals identify and address their needs. Mridu is a qualified mental health provider and the youth coordinator for human trafficking at MHMR. Reverend Yevette Christy is a United Methodist elder and an insightful survivor servant. After surviving 28 years of active drug addiction, 18 years in commercial sexual exploitation, and giving birth to the son of her trafficker, Yevette began the ongoing work of metabolizing her trauma. Yvette's lived experience uniquely qualifies her to offer support and encouragement for individuals and agencies striving to be advocates and allies for women who have survived commercial sexual exploitation. Reverend Christy is currently working on her Doctor of Ministry degree at Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University. Heather Amelia Johnson is a licensed professional counselor and program director with My Health, My Resources, MHMR, Tarrant County. She has been with MHMR for 7 years. Prior to her time with MHMR, Heather Amelia has gained over 12 years of experience in the behavioral health field and has lived experience as a mother and care provider. Her passion for transition-aged youth began at a young age as personal experience dealing with living on her own at the young age of 15. This ended up becoming an article for the local paper that talked about the trauma for young kids and what led them to being on their own very young. Heather Amelia's life experiences led her down the path of becoming a therapist, and her life experiences and her education are what make her passionate about trafficking and the transition-aged youth population. Carolina Utz is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an EMDR certified therapist with prior experience as a school counselor. Her work is centered around her passion for raising awareness about modern day oppression and empowering individuals who have experienced complex trauma. Carolina has a strong voice in advocating for social justice and has spoken extensively on a variety of topics, including human trafficking, intimate partner violence, and other issues affecting vulnerable members of the Latinx community. Currently, Carolina is focusing on her private practice where she guides individuals through complex trauma recovery. Our panelists will discuss trauma in the context of human trafficking. We are deeply grateful for each of you for taking your time to share your expertise with us today. Our panel will be moderated by Lance Cashin, founder and CEO of the Forge Room Foundation and Five Stone Steering Committee member. Lance, please take it away.
All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you again, panelists, for being here and just taking your time to be here, but we're going to cover as much as we can in like 40 minutes. And I know we could probably spend hours, if not half a day, on just this one topic. So thank you guys. So I'm going to just dive right in. Let's talk about defining terms here. What is the difference between trauma and complex trauma? So there's part one. And then how might we distinguish a person who is experiencing complex trauma from one who is experiencing trauma?
I can help with that question. We were all created, we were all wired for connection with the world, connection with our purpose, connection with nature, connection with each other, connection with our parents, our family, our loved ones, but also connection with ourselves. In order for us to connect with the world, to connect with each other, and to connect with ourselves, we need to feel safe. It's required to feel safe. When we go through a traumatic event, we move from connection to protection. And when we protect ourselves in different ways. By running away from that event, from that situation, from that threat, by fighting back. And if we realize that fighting back, it's not working, running away, it's not changing things, then I go into the ultimate form of protection, which is collapse. I freeze. And all of that with the intent to avoid pain. We all do it in different ways, day in and day out. This is what makes a traumatic event complex. Number one, if it happens during the developmental years, meaning when we were growing up, when we were learning about the world and our view of the world. Number two, also, it's the frequency of the traumatic event. If it happens multiple times every day for an extended period of time. Also polyvictimization, meaning it's not only one type of threats, but different types of abuse. It might be domestic violence in the home. It might be sexual abuse. It might be neglect, different components coming together. And there's another factor that I would like to add, which I still use this within my clinical practice, which is the moment after. We all go through a traumatic event, but many times what makes a difference is the support we receive the moment after. Many of the times when we fall into complex trauma, when those we serve are in complex trauma, it's because they didn't have anyone to reconnect the moments after, the day after, the week after, the year after. That's when complex trauma happens. And another, what's the second part to your question? Like a second question.
Yeah, so how might we distinguish a person who's experiencing complex trauma from one who's experiencing trauma?
A person who's experiencing complex trauma navigates within protection. And you may see this in some of the youth you work with or the survivors, the victims you work with. They're always navigating between running away from the moment, either physically or through thoughts. They might be ready to fight back. They're aggressive with their words, or they may collapse and cry. They're navigating between those three forms of protection. That's when you know it's complex trauma. It's difficult for them to switch back to connection. When it comes to trauma in general, we go through the traumatic event. We do whatever it's necessary to survive, but then we have resources to reconnect. We go and we tell a friend, we take the day off, we pray if it's part of so we have tools to reconnect. That's some of the main differences.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did y'all get that all written down there? Good. Okay. Next question. What is secondary trauma? And the second part of that question is, how can it affect any of us?
So I would like to answer that question. So secondary trauma is like defined and explained as like a emotional distress whenever a professional or somebody is going through handling a crisis situation, and like they experience that trauma of a client, and like they're like wondering like how can we like handle the trauma for the client, and they are going through the crisis situation themselves, because like they are in a stress of handling that situation, you know. So like the response, like it is really difficult for somebody to respond to a crisis situation and then like, you know, be okay with it. Like, you know, it takes like a resiliency themselves to like acknowledge that trauma and then like, you know, deal with it also. So like it is also known as like secondary trauma stress disorder. Like, you know, how PTSD symptoms are related, it's similar to that. So like it is really like responding to the client's traumatic situation, you know. So I would want to say that.
So I can add on to that as well. So it's almost like if you guys have ever heard somebody tell you a story and you felt an emotional response to the story they were telling you. And so it happens a lot to first responders. Anybody in social, pretty much probably everybody in this room has experienced some form of secondary trauma. Symptoms of it can be like fatigue, even illness, cynicism, just like almost what we perceive to be caregiver burnout, just burnout from work, from taking on it can even lead as far into like having dreams about what the patient has described to you. Those are all symptoms of secondary trauma. And so it can affect any of us because we are family members of victims, we are supports of victims, we're the first voice for a victim. So we are there to be supportive. And so any of us are at risk of being affected by it. So being aware of that and how it can affect us helps us in our job and our personal lives with our families, so that we don't feel like we need to have a separation from somebody who's going through a traumatic experience because we're also not managing very well.
Thank you. So let's move on to what is trauma-informed care, and what are the core principles of trauma-informed care?
That's a really long question. It's a very short question, very long answer. So I wrote some notes, guys, so I'm looking at my page because it's long. So how many of you guys in here have ever heard of trauma-informed care? By show of hands. Okay. I'm sure you guys work with an agency or work in a field where you guys have been taught what trauma-informed care is. So basically, trauma-informed care is a practice of healthcare providers to get the complete picture of a person in order to provide the best support. So the best part of trauma-informed care is the communication aspect. So if you have somebody who presents with like mental health diagnosable symptoms, they may also have diabetes, and we don't know that. And so the symptoms of that mental health disorder could be the result of the diabetes. And so trauma-informed care would say we work together with their doctors so that we provide that all around support. So I'm not just saying, oh, you have major depressive disorder, you know, and instead it's because their blood sugar is low or too high, right? Because when we don't feel good physically, we don't feel good at all. And so trauma-informed care is saying like we work together as a team and we get the whole picture holistically of the patient before we jump to a conclusion about them. The purpose of it is so that from the moment that a patient walks in the front door, or a victim or a family or us, that we are treated with like a level of understanding and respect. Because if you've been through a traumatic experience, that first like going to the police station, the first like interview, all of that care in those moments matter and help determine like what next steps you are going to take as a person. And so if you're a facilitator in that care, it's important that we understand that aspect. So we want to create from the moment they walk in the door till they leave, every aspect of it as an open, communicative situation for them to be able to express themselves and they can feel safe. And that we're not passing judgment because we think we already know. We're not jumping to conclusions by giving a depression diagnosis when they might be diabetic. And so there's 6 core principles. There used to be 5, now there's 6. Samsha updated it in case anybody hasn't been on their website recently. There's safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So feeling safe, physical and physiologically, and that trustworthiness and transparency, decisions are made, the transparency and the goal of the recovery. I think we've all probably experienced where we feel like decisions were made without us, and that's not a very fun thing to happen. Having interactions with someone who has shared personal experience, that's highly important, so that when you're communicating with somebody, and even though that person's not saying, oh, I know how you feel, just like knowing that you're not alone in the room with somebody, then it makes you feel inclusive and not excluded. Collaboration, so like there's no hierarchy, like I'm a therapist and you're the patient, but we are equal in this journey together. This is your journey. Empowerment, voice and choice, so that their feelings are recognized. Doesn't matter how we personally feel about it, we take that out of it. They need to feel heard. And that's the point of trauma-informed care, so that they do. And that we address the biases and stereotypes head on and trauma that they may have experienced. And that we are saying, like, we see that happened, and we are not going to continue to perseverate those behaviors or those biases or stereotypes. And so we do that every day in our practice with each other, like as professionals. And so just it's facilitating that additionally in a practice that we provide the patients. So short question, long answer. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Yvette, this is a question for you. As someone who's experienced commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking, now that you are in a professional anti-trafficking space, what does trauma-informed care mean to you?
So oftentimes when I hear professionals speak about trauma-informed care, it's often wrapped around systems and tools and how to implement the things that my panelists shared with you. But I want us to kind of think of it outside of systems, because systems don't restore people. Tools don't restore people, you restore people. And so when I hear trauma-informed care, I hear tools and things to think about and things to implement. But the only reason I'm here is because somebody took that transparency and that trustworthiness and that safety and that peer support, and they lifted it off the page and they embodied it. Like, there's a scripture that says it's better to dwell on a rooftop than to live inside with a cantankerous woman. Cantankerous man. And I say that because of this reason. You're living in the house with someone, you can provide me with a bed, you can provide me with tools, you can provide me with everything that I need to rebuild my life. But if you yourself are not embodying this sense of care and compassion and transparency, like I can't sense your humanity, then it's going to be difficult for me to really hold on to the trauma-informed care, because I don't trust systems. I don't necessarily trust tools provided by systems, but I can connect with you and you can bring these things to life for me. And so that is when I think of trauma-informed care, I don't care how the procedure that the doctor's doing. I care about the level of empathy and compassion in which the doctor is doing what he does, she does. Do you understand that? So that's important to me, because most of the trauma that I endured, I wasn't shocked by the things I endured in the world. I was a sex worker living on the streets, sleeping in traps outside. I expected the violence that I endured from the people in that world, that substrata. What shocked me and almost unmoored me was what I experienced from y'all. The condescension, the disrespect, and all of us have these tools, but the fatigue and the disrespect and being condescending. And I'll answer a part of this later, so I don't want to answer it now, but knowing that you embody this trauma-informed care, that's what makes it informed.
Thank you. What are some of the aspects of service provision that can lead to survivors becoming re-traumatized? How can service providers improve in those areas? I think you actually alluded to that. So anybody want to share?
I think healthy practices to deal with secondhand trauma. right? Whether you're an administrator taking calls or whether you're a law enforcement officer actually on the street and working to extract people. If you yourself, if we ourselves are not healthy, then you do me more damage. If you come in fatigued, if you come in enraged, if you're not happy in your marriage, if your dog is sick, if you've gotten a cancer, all the things that make the economy of living in this society so hard, if we're not having any practices that balance out and give us more body within ourselves, where we're displacing that energy, displacing that rage before you encounter me. Because I have complex trauma and I really don't need your stuff today. Do you know what I'm saying? So your secondhand, and so go hiking, buy a puppy, get a cat. I don't know. Go talk to Jesus. I don't know what your thing may be. And we laugh, but my recovery was set back by being in homes where they put me on a mattress that had menstrual blood still on it. I've been in homes where residential program, faith-based homes where the pastor is touchy-feely. We need healthy direct care service providers across the board. So whatever it takes for us to balance out with this economy, the pressure that it puts us under, stretching us over $1, and all of those different things, working 60, 70 hours a week to protect, to serve women like me. If we don't balance that with some life-giving practices, not only will we be undone, but you're gonna hurt somebody precious along the way. And if you hurt her, and I speak because I'm a woman, and that's my she, her, hers, then you also hurt her legacy, the children, the households, and the communities that she's involved in.
I love what you're saying. And this is what I appreciate the most about what you're presenting today. Many times when we talk about trauma informed, it's the professional going and taking a training, receiving, once a year a training, focus on those who are out there. We're doing this. We're equal. We're not exempt to trauma. No one in this room is exempt to a traumatic event. You've also have navigated that disconnect and let me protect myself and others. There's a connecting factor there. In order to be able to support and give and provide that connection through trust, you have to work on yourself first. There's, I'm bringing now polyvagal theory by Deb Dana and Stephen Porges. When they've talked about the polyvagal, this is all the things that I've been talking about, the running away, the fighting back, the reconnecting. In order for us to co-regulate, I should be able to self-regulate first. And that's the work that starts right here. That's the work that starts with me and within my home so I can take it to my community. It is required. That's social justice. That's knowing that there's a humanity that unified us all.
I agree to that. Like, it's really important that we take all of these things back to our community and educate them about how we can be aware about people going through certain things and how we can be sensitive towards their events, just talking to them in kindness, that might make a difference to that, and besides all that, we being a professional, we should be able to take our work to our community and educate them so that they can be at least have a understanding how to respond to somebody who has gone through traumatic situation. Yeah, that's what I think.
Ditto, all of that. I was just gonna say that sometimes we as professionals also need to recognize how we can de-escalate if we have contributed to re-traumatization. So re-traumatization, there we go. So there's lots of skills. I agree 100% with what you were saying about trauma-informed care, lifting it off the page. You guys, the practices that we just talked about, the 6 core principles, daily question yourself about how you're creating a safe environment. How are you presenting with trustworthiness? Saying those things, oh, I'm trustworthy, and knowing the action of being trustworthy are 2 very different things. We know that. So what are you showing to people around you? Instead of just saying that those things, how are you doing it? if I said, what's your self-care, and you can't give me a response in 1 second, you don't have a good self-care practice. So it's acknowledging those things too.
Recovering from trauma is unique to each individual, and there are many different recovery methods available. Which methods have you found most effective? Can you recommend tools that will help guide survivors on their healing journey?
So when I emerged from the life, none of this was happening. So I had to kind of like piecemeal my journey together. I do have a little list. For me, mental health therapy, but right next to that, somatic healing therapy. My sexual trauma started at 6 in the home, and I didn't leave the streets until I was 33. So if you can imagine how disconnected physiologically my mind is from my body. And then when women go in and they want to have healthy relationships or have a child, then they don't realize until that point that how disconnected and wounded they are from every part of their body that's ever been touched and abused. So please add that somatic healing piece. There's therapists that do that. I'm in it right now with other methods of therapy. But yeah, that spirituality. Many of us have faith-based organizations. Remember that not everybody has had a positive experience with religion. And so I think principles above denominations or about making like allegiances, forcing people to make allegiances when they're coming out of this fog. So spiritual principles without the being domineering about religion. And remember, for many people, I'm an African-American woman, a Black woman, that systems and religion have not always been good for us. So understand sometimes when someone's pushing back against maybe some religious programming you want to implement, just be mindful of that. That's the cultural competency piece. Community support beyond my recovery. Every time you call me together, we don't have to talk about my life the way it was. It can be how to dream, how to travel, how to do new things, take photographs, it doesn't matter. Things that allow me to see the world broader. Trauma-informed residential housing, long-term residential housing after independent housing, and then addiction recovery groups, if that's a part of it. But this is just my opinion. Limit those that keep the person saying, I am an addict. I am an addict. I am an addict. The scripture says life and death are in the power of the what? Tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. So I stopped going to groups that had me continually say what I was bound to. So that's something to think about. Educational and vocational opportunities. When I left the streets, I had 3 kids, one of which was the son of my trafficker, and I had no skill set. And so it's important that we're serious about, because poverty is that's the first thing that'll send me back, right? Because I can make money in other ways and not have to tolerate Target. 2 more things, rest and play. Man, when I got into a program, give at 5:30, cook eggs, pray at 6:30, 7:30, shower, 8 o'clock. So then by the time I leave the home and I have my 3 kids back, I'm like, all right, it's 5:30, everybody get up and pray, 7:30, everybody do their chores, 8 o'clock, everybody. And it doesn't give a realistic balance of what it means to be alive. And so while you're trying to program or unprogram, whatever the language is, make sure that you incorporate rest. Yeah. After 18 years of being worked over, I was so tired. And after 3 days, they were like, get up at 5:30 and cook eggs. So rest and then play. Joy is joy is scarce. We almost don't even, Brene Brown talked about that. Joy is something we're like terrified of. It's gonna all come clapping down. And so helping survivors see the joy and the wonder of what it means to be alive, because that's gonna make me wanna stretch. That's gonna make me wanna reach, not just because I wanna get out of what was, but because there's a promise that I can walk into of a life that's beautiful and full.
Anyone else want to add?
I dare not. I was just gonna speak from like the clinical aspect. So we found that with the population of kids that we work with, that equine therapy has been like super effective. So if you like animals, any type of therapy that involves animals have been really good. It's been calming for the spirit for them. That's what we've been told. So I was just gonna run down a list of like therapeutic modalities, but I'll skip that. Since
No,
you
go
pretty
ahead.
much.
That's just from Ivor's perspective, so the clinical part is vital.
So EMDR is huge in that aspect. CBT. In early stages, we found that grounding techniques work really well. Prayer, if you have a religious component, deep breathing. All very beneficial tools. Also very beneficial tools for secondary trauma. So going back to the previous question about things that we can do to treat that part of it. So.
Allow me to add this. As an EMDR certified therapist, I have seen the changes of individuals going through that process. I have seen that same change within my life, processing my own trauma. But there is a step before that needs to take place. And it is for that individual in your clinical setting, that individual that you're meeting with, that you're connecting with, to feel safe. So a lot of times the pre-work that I do before even thinking about reprocessing, before even mentioning within EMDR, it's the making sure that all of the parts of the individual feel safe to go on this journey again. That's a pretty heavy journey that we're doing. It's a very careful one. I have to make sure that all of their protected parts say, okay, let's do this. I trust you. I know you're going to keep me safe. As we revisit the memory, we clear it out, we let it go, and we come back to the present moment. So making sure that we listen to all the parts that is so upset for what happened. And so many times I gave him an opportunity, the part who feels sad, and this is going to be hard, but there's also that part that's connected through love. There was one part within that very abusive dynamic that says, I'm still holding on to that. He was kind one time. She gave me that time. So I need to honor all of the parts that says, hey, you do deserve healing. We listen to the parts. Many times we go back to younger ages when that disconnect happened, but I have to make sure that if we go on this journey, everyone agrees to go. And I'm talking about internal family systems now.
Yeah, I do agree. Like how Yvette, she mentioned, like we need to have that connection built. Like, when we are working with our clients, it's so important that we understand our client first. Like, what that person might need is what we are not like we might think that person needs something, but like that is completely different from that person's perspective. So like we have to actually understand person as an individual first, like know you as a person. And like if I don't know you, how can I understand your needs? So that's really important for us to do anything regarding therapy. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any differences between treating trauma with males versus females? And then the second part of that question, are there differences in treating trauma amongst age groups, children, teens versus adults?
I think this is my question. And I thought about it. And this is the best answer that I can provide. Within the clinical setting or whatever that setting that you're connecting with that individual, of course, it's necessary and important to know their, when it comes to gender, when it comes to their background, socioeconomic background, their culture, where they're coming from, all of that makes part of the therapeutic relationship. All of that, it's part of the conversation. However, the invitation is for you to look farther into it. It's for you to look at that person and that system that the individual carries within. We've talked about it briefly in our previous question about internal family systems. And I've actually learned this from our youth at the underground. They kept talking about parts. And there's a part of me that wanted to run away, but I didn't. Tell me more about that part. Or the part that says, yes, I was, it was 5 a.m. It was raining, I was cold, and I remember the underground. There was a part of me that knew its way to the tell me more about that part. That's the part of you that emerged forward and help you in that process. Every time, and by the way, we all have different parts within us. Every time we experience a traumatic event, there's a part of us that emerges, that comes forward. Its main purpose is to avoid pain. So if we experience traumatic events daily, many times there are multiple parts popping in to protect us. With time, especially in cases of complex trauma, those parts become very rigid. They're so good at their role. They're so good. Hey, let me run away. This is what I know. Let me run away. So the intention is to, again, we pick up all the other information about the client or youth or individual we're working with. The invitation is to go a little bit further. How is the protective system, the tools that they already carry, the parts that made them pick up the phone and ask for help and support? How do we honor them and how we give them more resources?
Thank you. Is there a time frame in which survivors of trafficking can expect to be fully restored?
Oh, my answer would be no. And I say that because I got, I was good until I started dating. And then I was good until I had this huge job offer. Like they were like, we want you and you're the one, we're gonna fly you out, and then they said we're reneging on that offer. That rejection, that professional rejection spun me out of control for 6 months because it was tied to other rejections. But it's not until we live that, because they say healing is never linear. It's not until we encounter that next day when a man rubs his hand down my back inappropriately in a business setting that I might be like, so it's never like far from me. Does it sting anymore? No, not really. Is there a stench? I sure hope not. But there's residuals that are going to be awakened just by being alive. And that's why I'm in a new session of EMDR right now. I continue therapeutic cycles because of this very reason, but nobody told me that. Nobody told me that was, once I left those programs, they never told me that in 3 to 5 years when this happens, or when my mother passed away, I was completely gutted. And so for me, it's not that that there's no healing. It's just that it's gonna be a thing that goes back and forth for me. So
allow me to connect with something you said earlier. You've talked about that somatic experience. When we are on protection mode, on survival mode, our bodies in all of its wisdom says, ooh, this is a lot. We don't have the people, the resources, the time to process what just happened through cognition, through emotions. So physically, we store that memory. And it's go, 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 go. It's just getting up, getting the kids ready, go to school, take the test, do well, come home, leave the house. Many times what I have seen from those I walk with, they say, why now? I was able to build a home. Finally, I have a stability. Finally, I have a safe partner, and I have anxiety and I have panic attack and all of this. I'm going back. And in many ways, again, the wisdom of our system says, hey, you're ready now. You have the time, you have safe people around you, you have resources, you have more control. You're not 6 anymore. You are 26. So now let me remind you about this memory that I've been carrying for you. Boom, panic attack. So that's again, it takes you by surprise. It can be frustrated because you were marching forward, but it's also your system letting you know we can do this. Let's connect with safe people. Let's process that so we can let it go.
What do you see as a professional in your specific area as the biggest challenge to victim restoration?
So access to resources for one, peer support for minors, it's really hard to do. It's not something in Texas that's commonly found. And then because specifically for us, because we deal with victims that are minors, the laws with the right to choose affect highly, and the resources for that population is very, very stringent. also immigrant populations too, finding
Yeah.
support for immigrant populations.
Especially when you are an immigrant and you don't have your documentations in place, it's really difficult for you to like get into those resources and connect you to those resources because they don't have that, you know. They're already in the crisis situation and then like, you know, that is already a disadvantage. And then like, you know, with their documentation not in place, that makes them like, you know, further victimized in that situation. Yeah.
I just have one. I think sometimes as direct care service providers, we're looking at the low hanging fruit. We're looking at those things that are obvious to us at that time. For me, one of the biggest obstacles to victim restoration is it's failure to acknowledge systemic issues.
Yeah.
So you're serving Brittany. She's right here. She's fruit. But we're not, and I don't think we necessarily all of us have the capacity for it based on our 9-to-5 schedule and our families, but you know, Brittany's a whole tree and she has deep roots. And it's like trying to get cancer out and only scraping like a little bit of it and expecting health to grow from that. So for me, the biggest thing for victim restoration is not really being believed and people not believing that I have to deal with the systemic issues that I still face as a woman, as an ex-sex worker, as a Black person, all the things, right? So each of them have their own root. And on top of that, the second thing for me would be resources after programming. When I left the program, I had my kids and I was on the corner just standing there holding my kids' hands. I didn't have a car, I didn't have education, I didn't have anywhere to go. And there were no support services to help me get to that next step. And so I think we need to think about that last leg of the journey. Not last leg, but that last bit that gets them to the other side of the shore. After crossing a tumultuous river, trying to emerge from that life, if you can envision that with me, waiting for stones to pop up along the way, and then the stones just stop. And you're having to navigate these turbulent waters with you don't know how to swim. And so for me, victim restoration comes with that last piece of making it to the other side safely.
And it's a good reminder as a clinician, because here I am waiting in my office, air conditioned, ready to talk about their emotions and things. And she's thinking about, you know, what are we going to eat tonight? Where are we going to sleep? I need a job. I have that job interview. I have applications. So also for me to step away from that structure and says, well, what's her priority now? What can I do? What can provide? Can I open the space? Can I offer whatever it is that I can offer to make sure that, you know, we go through the basic needs again for her to feel safe and then be like, okay, now I can engage in this conversation. Yeah.
Else? Good. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists. We appreciate it. Please give it up.
That was powerful. Thank you so much to Lance and our panelists and to all of you here in the room and online. We really appreciate you joining us today. If you haven't signed in on either the roster at the front of the room or the chat log, please do so before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.